In this series, we've been exploring whether a paradigmatic shift in human consciousness can help us weather the twin crises of the unraveling of the planet's life support systems and the very viability of human civilization in the coming century.
This video, Part 5, summarizes the first 4 of the series on the evolution of consciousness as a solution to the twin crises of environment and civilization. The collective human consciousness has changed through time and is changing still. As with an individual, humanity's collective consciousness evolves stepwise through certain specific developmental stages. Not everyone is in the same stage at the same time. At the moment, humanity seems to be in an adolescent phase. Like an adolescent, civilization is rebellious, trying to prove that we are independent of nature, for example. It is reckless and consuming as if there were no consequences. We are concerned with appearances, and we are thus status and consumer-oriented. We are drawn towards instant gratification, mostly through consumer products and entertainment. We still engage in clique think, whether our in-group is religious in nature or political, ethnic, gender, class-based, etc. Like adolescents, we often lack control over our behaviors, even when we see them as problems, and therefore, understandably, we can have difficulty taking responsibility for our behaviors. We know, for instance, that burning gasoline releases CO2 into the atmosphere, but we still drive and fly profligately, wherever we want and whenever we can. The economist Robert Reich reported that half of Americans polled feel that it is the responsibility of business, not the consumers, to protect the environment. Again, this is much like an adolescent's worldview, where with great freedom comes little responsibility. Like adolescents, Americans expect the authorities to take the lead, which may actually be more appropriate in the case of adolescents. Only some very small portion of our species has reached the kind of consciousness we may all need to adopt if civilization and its billions are to exist happily in the coming centuries. There are 3 major obstacles to us changing. 1. It is difficult to change one's entire worldview. We have our entire being invested in our worldview. 2. Those people and institutions that benefit the most from our present configuration of civilization have the most to lose, and have the most power and wealth to prevent change. And 3. Even when we want to change, we may not have the wisdom or perspective to make the correct changes. There are some noted ways to develop one's consciousness. For instance, education, meditation, and ingestion of psychedelics under guidance. However, they each come with their own limitations and challenges, and even in the best of circumstances, greater awareness is not guaranteed. Sadly, the most likely cause for change will be crises that gravely alter our circumstances. The good news is that humans and human culture are exceptionally adept at adapting to new, difficult circumstances. The bad news is the process entails great suffering, both for our fellow species and for the billions of humans alive during civilization's transition. So, where does this leave us? Is there a global-scale shift in consciousness? Yes, probably. The collective human consciousness has changed continually through history, and significant changes occurred in response to changing circumstances. Our circumstances are changing faster than ever before, mainly because we have passed threshold levels with respect to population, material consumption, and environmental destruction. And so our consciousness is also shifting correspondingly. Will this shift occur fast enough to avoid a population crash and the collapse of global civilization? There is little evidence to support this notion. However consciousness may be evolving, so far at least, all measures of planetary disharmony remain on pace. Ocean acidification, deforestation, destruction of life in terms of both its diversity and the sheer biomass, CO2 emissions, global warming, and climate change, material consumption measured, for instance, by GDP, drawdown of fossil fuels, water drawdown and water scarcity, soil degradation and desertification, global poverty and hunger, and inequality in wealth and power. And there's only some very small percent of our human family who have developed a consciousness sufficient to voluntarily and wisely live the materially simple, small family lifestyles necessary for our sustainable existence on this planet. Sadly, the circumstances that will press our backs to the wall are likely right around the corner. We will be forced to either make the appropriate changes or to disintegrate into socio-economic chaos. On the plus side, it probably takes only a small percent of committed leaders and their followers to effect significant social change. Also in the positive, we are far more aware of our challenges, and we are far more self-aware, individually and collectively, than at any time before. Still, as likely as any future scenario, and more likely than most, is something like the following. Large-scale famine will grip many of the poor regions sometime this century. This and the impacts of climate change will lead to wide-scale immigration, both within countries and from poor towards wealthier regions. These, as well as other related tensions, will strain many of the third world societies beyond their thresholds. Many countries will fall into the kind of chaos we've seen in the past few years within Somalia, Syria, Libya, Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And economic globalism will likely fracture into numerous more independent spheres. That is, globalism will retrench for the first time in a millennium. There will again be a great variety of societies, of socioeconomic experiments, and of the successes and failures that come with the new and the novel. Humans will, sooner or later, come to live in sustainable ways. Humanity may exist for a long time, millions of years perhaps, our descendants' fortunes rising and falling and rising again with nature's vicissitudes, with geological and astronomical cycles, for example, and increasingly less due to our own ignorance and immaturity.